That was close. Washington escaped 15-7 against Arizona State.
You are Locked On Huskies, your daily podcast on the Washington Huskies, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back into another episode of Locked On Huskies. I'm Roman Tomashoff. That's Lars Hanson. We write for Inside the Huskies of Fan Nation Sports Illustrated. You can check out all our written work over at si.com/college/Washington. Today's episode is brought to you by PrizePicks. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnCollege and use code LockedOnCollege for first deposit match up to $100. Daily fantasy sports made easy. Also, thank you for making this your first watch or first listen of the day. We apologize that this is coming to you on a Monday morning, but for all our YouTube viewers out there, you can very clearly see that Lars and I are insanely sleep deprived after that. Let's just call it a debacle against Arizona State, where the Huskies did escape 15-7 and did move to 7-0, stayed at number 5 in the AP poll. But Lars, just initial takeaways from that game-ish thing?
Yeah, I forgot. It was a little bit different final couple of minutes against Arizona State as it was against Oregon, where Oregon was like, whoa, okay, yeah, the big low and the big high. The game was basically low, and then at the very end, when we were both, Roman and I, were in the elevator.
I was gonna say, did we want to out ourselves on the podcast?
Yeah. I mean,
get live.
So like because we had to get down on the field before the 8-minute mark. We're like, okay, let's get down there. And ironically enough, the guy operating the elevator kept opening and closing the door. I'm like, hey, if you want to keep the play open, like we can watch the play. And he finally closed it. We get out and do a massive roar, and I'm like, well, something must have happened. And lo and behold, something definitely did happen.
I remember just looking at the screen on just when we were getting out of the elevator, and all the security guards are watching, and all we see is Mishael Powell just crossing the goal line. And I just said, no way. And I just shout out to Mish, first of all, because I know I pointed this out to you a couple times in the box. One time was on that second goal play on the first Oregon's drive right before the half last week, where he was this close to jumping the route and taking that one back for a touchdown, where he's done that a couple times this year. And it kind of felt like it was only a matter of time where he did it again, jumped the route, and just was able to get some kind of nice return. And on a day where the offense just couldn't get anything going, I know we're going to get into that a lot more as the show goes on too, but on a day where the offense couldn't get anything going, you had the tweet of the defense might need to just like win this game themselves. And they did. And credit to them for doing that. And it was just, I wanted to give like just an extra shout out to Mish, who worked super hard. I know everybody knows his backstory. There's a lot about it over on Inside the Huskies. You can go check that out over there. Where a walk-on, got a scholarship once DeBoer came on board, and has just been kind of a stalwart on this defense since then. And he just finally has that one signature play. And I really enjoyed the moment after the game when we were talking to him in the press conference. And he just said, yeah, that was the first touchdown I've scored since I was like 10 years old and playing tight end. So just really, really incredible play. And Lars, it's something we've harped on this show off the air. Wherever you can get it, we talk about it. Kalen DeBoer said it himself that last year his team doesn't win this game. That last year they straight up they wouldn't find a way to win. But what does this team keep doing? They find ways to win the game, and that's what good teams do.
Yeah, well, and also great teams find a way to where a unit on one side of the ball, which I had on my shirt on Inside the Huskies after the game, specifically highlighting just the entire defense. They had given up 29 points per game over the last 3 games to Cal, Arizona, and Oregon. And then you hold Arizona State, who, again, not the greatest offense, certainly in the conference, but you hold them to 1 touchdown when the offense kept putting you back on the field. It wasn't like the offense was in a shootout where, like, okay, you're trading blows, you're getting enough time. Penix had an uncharacteristic bad game. Wasn't necessarily all on him, right? I mean, there were some decisions that I'm sure he'll like to have back, but the play calling was insanely suspect. And so it was good to see the defense on a night when not necessarily we'd counted them out, but it's like, hey, if any of those other drives go for the points, they lose that game. Yes. So the defense had to hit every single time. And again, and the thing about, I'm glad you highlighted about Mish, was he's a guy to where, if you remember in the first quarter, first half, certainly, where Alfonso Chuputala tried to strip, I believe it was Scadaboo, or one of the Arizona State players. And instead of wrapping him up, he tries to strip it, which, I mean, again, I understand, go for the strip, but in that point of the game, that's not necessarily the move. And as a result, Scottaboo skates away for like another, 10, 12 yards there. And it's like, wow, okay, tackling is still an issue. The one guy who's not had a tackling problem on this defense has been Mishael Powell. We saw in the Oregon game against Jordan James, where he's going to go right to make the play, whatever the play calls for, whether it's a hard hit, whether it's just wrapping up on the shoestring, or whether it's breaking on the ball. Because he easily could have just, tried to tackle the receiver and play the receiver, not the ball, instead of playing the ball, gets an 89-yard touchdown. To his point, if you watch that play setup, Mish was on, I believe, either the middle or far side of the field, and had to go all the way to go as they put whoever it was in Arizona State put that player in motion. Mish followed him over and then ghosted in, read the play perfectly, and broke it. So I think it's really just a testament to kind of the good players on this defense and the great players on this defense show up when it matters. And for the rest of the unit, they just do have to do their job, right? I think that's exactly what happened. You don't need a ton of game records, but the people who are game records and the guys who are game records need to kind of take that step. And the guys who are did. I mean, I said, 2 interceptions in the game, and they only had 1. So it's like, well, and you get, I don't even know if they had a sack, did they? I think they
didn't have a sack.
And so on a day when everything else is struggling and you're not necessarily hitting home and you're not seeing the fruits of your labor against a weaker offense, somebody had to step up, and Mish was that guy. Because again, if that doesn't happen, I mean, even honestly, even if Arizona State doesn't convert that 4th down, that 4th and 3, and by the way, for everybody ripping Kenny Dillingham for saying kick the field goal, much like Lanning in a way, I understand why he goes for it, because first of all, he had been going for it for most of the game, right? So it's not like it was his first time going for it on 4th down. You're in plus territory. You're in their territory. So Washington's going to have to drive the length of the field if you don't get it and don't turn the ball over, which they had not done all game. I know, as crazy as that sounds, Washington didn't move the ball at all. So if I'm Dillingham, I'm like, okay. If anything, given that they missed a 31-yarder, I believe, in the first half, right off the right upright. So it's not necessarily a gimme that you make that kick. So I actually fully applaud Kenny Dillingham for the way he called that game. I mean, ASU had the better offensive play calling in that game, bar none. Like, that's not even a debate.
It's not even close, yeah. And I want to make sure we hit on that just a second early, and then we're going to make sure to flip over to it late. But there were just so many times where you and I just kind of looked at each other, or because I remember, like, we're walking down to the field after we outed ourselves and said we missed the pick 6, and we see that they were going for 2, and I was like, oh, that's interesting. I understand why. I'm not arguing that, but the play call felt a lot like, remember in 2019 there was the Utah game, and they called that double reverse to Hunter Bryant, I think it was, and it was just like that huge loss on 4th down. It felt in that same vein of just, why is that the play call when you need, in that case, 1 yard? In this case, you need 2 yards. Like, that doesn't make any sense. And yeah, there were a lot of issues, just especially in terms of Arizona State just kept sending big blitzes over and over and over and over and over again. And it wasn't until the very last drive of the game, when they already had a lead, that was, okay, now the ball's going to come out quick. Now the ball's going to come out quick. Now we're going to go over here. Now we're going to go over there. Until that point, it was, we're going to take deep shots and we're going to stick to our guns, even though, and this is no shot at anybody along the interior of the offensive line, because it's very hard to block 5 people with 3 guys, because that was what was going on for the majority of the game, where they recognized that early on, and Arizona State said, we're just going to send a huge blitz up the middle and get somebody right in Penix's face every single time. And especially for a decent period of the game, a true freshman at center and a redshirt freshman at right guard, as talented as we think both of those players are, that's really, really hard for them to overcome. And that's something where you need, as the offensive coordinator, as the play caller, as the highest paid play caller in the country, by the way, that is something that you need to adjust to as soon as you see that. And I understand we're going to stick to our guns, we're going to do this, but you're down 2 receivers. You're down a starting interior offensive lineman. You're already down another one from earlier in the season, but we don't need to go into that because we've harped on that point enough. But that's just truly the only word to use is unacceptable. Like that's what that is.
Well, and you add to it the fact that you have 13 rushes for 13 yards. I mean, there was a point where I pointed to you. I'm like, look at the Penix attempts and rushing attempts. Just in general, just doesn't matter who's getting it. Just look at it. And Dylan it wasn't necessarily that Dylan wasn't getting lanes. I mean, he ripped off a couple of big ones, but the problem was it was like, okay, Dylan Johnson gets a 12-yard carry, great, but then they go right back to him at his zone, and he gets a no gain or a loss at 2.
Like
it's
loss
okay.
of like 5. There were multiple carries that were like loss of like 5 or 6 yards.
Right, and so it's like, okay, you don't necessarily have it almost seemed like Grubb kind of was forcing it one way or the other. Like, hey, look, we're gonna live and die by Penix's arm. Okay, that's not working. Let's try Dylan. But then it's like, okay, when you're 3rd and 18, there's no play in the playbook that's gonna work for that. And yeah, it just seemed. And I mean, first of all, we got to credit as much as Dillingham, Brian Ward, ASU's defensive coordinator, because like with or without that pressure, I mean, that was a fantastically play called game. So from a defensive perspective, but I think if you're Penix, that was kind of a game that I don't think he'd had at Washington. Where I mean, yes, you have the game last year at ASU, yes, you have the game last year at UCLA, but even both of those weren't like this, where it's like he was struggling. There was constant pressure in his face. Run game's not helping. Play calling's not helping. You got to figure it out on your own almost. I mean, because I asked Penix after the game, like, it seemed like you checked into a lot of stuff, like it checked out of a lot of calls. What was the conversation like with Grubb? It's like, well, the one thing that he did hit on was we were kind of getting too cute, right? Just let us be us. And it's like, well, but the problem with let us be us is also you guys are predicated on the deep shot, and that was definitely not going to happen last night.
It was not there. And I know it's something we need to talk about, just kind of in the vein of the deep shots too, was the officiating was horrendous. And right off the bat, because it's what we see on Twitter, is, oh, well, there was that no call, or like the flag that got picked up on Jabbar Muhammad. Okay, first of all, the Raylan Goforth pass interference, which was the first one, was terrible. The official who was standing 3 yards away from that play did not throw a flag. And somebody from the very back of it, no, I'm gonna toss one from back here. So that one doesn't get picked up. And then Jalen Polk gets tackled, like just straight up tackled going downfield, right? That one doesn't get called. There's just not even an inkling of, oh yeah, let's throw that flag. I pointed out on Twitter where Parker Brailsford got his helmet knocked off on one play. On a very clear, it was inadvertent, but that flag still comes out every single time, where a hand was in his chest and kind of just goes up and ends up knocking his helmet off. That's a flag. That's a penalty. Like, that's like, I know it's not the letter of the law, but that's when that flag comes out. And then, okay, well, the Jabbar Muhammad one, oh, that one gets picked up. It's just, it was bad on both sides. It was terrible. The officiating all night was just horrendous. And that's one of many things I'm really glad that we get to just kind of leave behind as in the Pac-12 is just the officiating that you get to see sometimes. It's just truly baffling.
Yeah, I think the only thing they got right was the targeting on Clayton Smith.
Yeah.
I think that one was the only one where, and by the way, nobody is debating that. Nobody is talking about it after the fact. I mean, and that one actually, even they didn't initially rule targeting on it. They went to go review it for targeting after the personal foul call, after the late hit was called. It was like,
that's the right way. That's the right way to call that sometimes, where they say, oh, we're going to look at this for targeting like upstairs.
Right. But even still, it's like you could have called, like, if you're being cynical, right, you could have called even targeting on the play and then said, now we will go review it, right? Like, hey, like, we're already on top of it. We already see it. But even to that, it's like that was the only clean call in the game. Everything else was like, I mean, and again, I'll be honest, I kind of laugh when I see the slow motion Jabbar play, because I mean, shout out to Jabbar for that. Like,
hey, he's somebody we need to talk about more of too, because I like, just Jabbar is everything that we've expected him to be. He didn't have his best game against Oregon last week, but outside of that, he has been everything that we expected. And shout out to our buddy Mike Burrell, who pointed this out on Twitter, that Washington's passing defense has been great. And if you, I want to pull up the stats here, but Washington's pass defense hasn't been necessarily elite, but they've been really, really good. And I'm just going to read his tweet off here word for word. Despite opponents attempting more passes per game, which 41.4, than any team in the nation against Washington, the Huskies rank 7th nationally in passes defended, which is nearly 6 a game, 14th in picks with 9, 16th in opponent yards per pass attempt with just 6 yards per attempt and 19th in opponent pass efficiency rate. So the defense is really, really good. And a lot of that starts with Jabbar Muhammad because he has been everything that we asked, where he just takes away one half of the field. Sorry, Lars, go ahead.
What I was also going to say, but I mean, equally to your point, that's accurate through the most part of the season. But last night, I think it was Elijah Jackson who made more.
Elijah was excellent.
Like, because it was and almost every single time he was. I mean, there's a couple of passes that he allowed, obviously, but when he did allow a pass, he was like right there, like within a half a second to make the play, and he made. I think he had 2 pass defenses. UW as a defense had 9. They didn't have more than. And they didn't have more than 5 in a prior game in the entire, maybe it's 6, but they clear and above most passes defense. So it's like, okay, if you're only going to get 1 pick or 1 turnover, at least bat a bunch of balls down. I mean, Raylan and Elijah almost had another pick at the end of the game on that final drive. There was just so much that you've seen from the secondary where it's like, okay, this secondary is getting better. It's getting there. It's still not there, but it's certainly getting there. And I think that's exactly what
progress.
You want, especially at this point in the season. That's what you want, because when you're going into, USC, when you're going into, does any other passing offense scare you besides USC at this point?
I don't want to say anything about jinxing it, so I'm going to say,
I'm going to say Stanford and Wazoo, but I'm also going to say Stanford because of what Travis Hunter allowed to.
Yeah, that's fair.
That one Stanford receiver, basically that was basically the game right there. It's like this is a 1-on-1
300 yards.
So, but again, but for the most part, right? For the most part, you're looking at USC, probably Washington State, and then Stanford. So, but really, probably the first 2. So it's like this is the perfect time for this secondary to get sharp, because then you have to hope, okay, well, if you're facing a Michigan in the playoffs, if you're facing a Georgia in the playoffs, if you're facing a Texas in the playoffs, those are the teams with better offenses that your secondary is going to want to be battle tested and proven against, versus like, okay, well, we haven't really been tested. When we have been tested, we kind of sucked.
Right. And it's one thing where you kind of see that. And like, that's why I wanted to give Jabbar credit, where Elijah had a fantastic game. And I'm not discrediting him in any way when I say this, but when you kind of look at Jabbar's side of the field and you just think, I'm not going to throw it that way, sometimes the only logical option is, okay, well, I'm going to have to come back over this way. Or like sometimes you see like everything over the middle, especially with one of the things that Kenny Dillingham did a lot of to just kind of avoid pressure was just rolling out Trenton Bourguet, just time and time again, just rolling him out. And sometimes he rolled him away from Jabbar's side, which just kind of meant, okay, yeah, the logical choice is this receiver right here is going to be the best option. And Elijah Jackson needed to step up, and he did. More often than not, he did. Shout out to our buddy Ben Glassmeyer, who friend of the program, as we've had him on. He's been texting me throughout the last couple of games, like, I want to see Elijah step up. And what is he? There's still been some stumbles, but he has stepped up when needed. PBU's in the end zone, just doing a really, really good job overall, I would say.
Right, and not forcing it, right? Not being like, oh, hey, I need to get picks. It's like, well, hang on. If you try and go for a pick, miss the ball, and allow a catch and gives up a touchdown, great, nice try. But it's like, just make the PBU. Just bat the ball down. Just do that. Make sure you're in position so that, and to Misha's point, next time when you're in that position, that's a pick, right? Yes. But if you're not there to make the play regardless, you're not going to get the pick. So I think it's a matter of just doing a job, executing, and these are all coach speak, but it's like that's why coaches say it. It's why it's coach speak. Because it's like, well, why are they not making plays? Like, well, are they not in position? Are they not close to the ball? Are they not reading? I mean, these are all cliches, but it's like, well, this is exactly what coaches want to see. And I actually asked Chuck Morrell before the Arizona State game, where it's like, no, EJ's just playing more confident, and it's like, I think we can see that. I think it's pretty clear that he's playing more confident, fully healthy for an entire season. He's kind of like hitting his stride now. Next season, you'd think, okay, next year is his year to really pop and shine.
Right. And because we're going to, I feel like we've had a lot to say about this one, but we really wanted to make sure we hit on the questionable play call and all of that sort of stuff. So next on Locked On Huskies, we're going to touch on all of that. But first, we're going to take a second and talk about our friends over at Prize Picks, because we're recording this on Sunday. And as I say every time we do this, I love me some fantasy football. So I have to make sure I get this in. And Deanna Foreman is just absolutely destroying me. So I really hope some people have him in their Prize Picks lineups this week and just smashed all those overs. Me personally, not so much, destroying me. But Prize Picks, it's so much fun. So, it's really great. Just kind of balance that out. You can win up to 25 times your money this football season. All you have to do is select 2 or more players, pick more or less on their projected stats, and place your entry. It's that simple. Prize Picks is really simple to play. As I just said, you can make your picks and submit your entry in less than 60 seconds. And some of the things that make Prize Picks the #1 daily fantasy sports app are quick withdrawals, easy gameplay, and an enormous selection of players and stat types to choose from. And, one of the great things is that Prize Picks now offers Apple Pay for quick and easy deposits into your account this football season. And do you want to get in on the action? Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnCollege and use code LockedOnCollege for a first deposit match up to $100. Again, that's at prizepicks.com/LockedOnCollege and use the code LockedOnCollege for a first deposit match up to $100. Prize Picks is daily fantasy sports made easy. Whew. All right. We discussed this at length last night. We were just yelling about this in our parking lot at 1:00 in the morning, just kind of like as we were getting ready to leave the stadium, just like, man, what was this? What was this? What was that? What is the #1 thing about the play calling that stood out to you yesterday?
It was the lack of, the obvious one is lack of in-game adjustments, right? Because I think what stood out to me, sorry, I missed the mute button there. What stood out to me was that, once you could clearly see Arizona State was going to bring pressure, what bothered me was there was nothing underneath. There was no mesh route. There was nothing that allowed Penix to, even in the open field, to be like, okay, I think it was a 3rd down play at one point, but this happened a couple of times where Arizona State's bringing 7, it was 6 or 7, but you could see there was one-on-one matchups outside, or 2, sometimes Rome would be double covered or whatever, but all of the routes are going away and deep, which again, I understand from a traditional Washington perspective, that's what the offense does. But when you're Michael Penix and you're under pressure and you're trying to either roll out or you're trying to find something and you have no underneath option, you are cutting his legs out from under him. There has to be, and I understand you don't have Jalen McMillan and you don't have Jeremy Bernard. Jalen McMillan was the underneath guy. Jalen McMillan was the guy in the zone.
I'm sorry to cut you off, but that's one thing I wanted to make sure we hit on. And I just want to touch on a comment we got, I think on YouTube or something earlier in the week, where somebody said, I don't want to hear about the receivers. I want to hear about the defense. This is why we talked about the receivers earlier in the week, because Jalen McMillan and Jeremy Bernard, both of them, just have that underneath capability, that ability to just, and it's something that I said to you yesterday, I remember at some point, where it was without those two guys just even being available, it just kind of, I don't know if it does it limit what Washington's offense can do in a sense? Yes, but it also just kind of allows the defense to do what Arizona State did yesterday, what Brian Ward did, where they're bringing so many blitzes because they say, okay, we know what Rome Odunze's main skill set is. We know what Jalen Polk's is. So we know that this is what they're going to do the majority of the time. So instead of just saying, okay, we're going to be willing to let anybody beat us over the middle of the field and just keep it short, keep it in front, all those kinds of things. And instead of adjusting, instead of seeing that without Jalen McMillan and Jeremy Bernard, who are two of those options that, can just sit down 8-9 yards into a route and just say, okay, I'm just going to pick up a couple of yards after the catch, do whatever it is. That just didn't happen. We didn't see that at all. And that was the thing that I was most concerned about when you just kind of started hearing these rumblings that both of those guys might be out in that game. And so I'm sorry to cut you off. I just want to make sure that was something that we definitely touched on.
Right. And that was the thing that Jamarcus Shepard said to us, is where it's like, you don't replace J-Mac. You can kind of replace Jeremy in a way, but because he hasn't been in the system for a full year, it's like, okay, well, he's still kind of proving himself and what he can do. But we all know what McMillan can do in this offense. So it's a matter of, okay, well, obviously, Giles is not an exact replica of McMillan, but he can kind of, sit down in the middle. But even the routes weren't there. Like right. I never saw those routes coming together. And even at times when Dylan Johnson would be in the flat, or, Jack Westover maybe underneath or something like that. It would kind of work, but there were also other times when Penix wouldn't see him. And so it's like, okay, you have to be able to help Penix. Grubb's job is to help Penix's eyes on the field, right? Because, I mean, to be fair, Michael is the one still making the plays and doing all that. But after a while, you have to know what your quarterback can do and can't do. And it's like, hey, if you're noticing that he's kind of focusing on one guy, it's like, hey, let's try. Because that's why I asked him, like, hey, what was the conversation like with Grubb? How was that give and take conversation? Because was he saying, hey, check this, do that, do this, do that? It just seemed like there was a disconnect for whatever reason. I mean, you saw Penix on the sideline. Not that it was good or bad or indifferent, but it just kind of seemed like he was different on the sideline. I mean, it wasn't necessarily the same Penix that we had seen for whatever reason, right? And maybe honestly, we couldn't see the coaches
frustrated personally.
Well, I'm frustrated because of the play calling or because of the execution. Because I think it's a mix of both. I think it's a mix of both.
Yeah,
it's not all one, and it's not all. Ryan Grubb didn't almost lose in the game. Michael Penix didn't almost lose in the game. The whole operation on offense almost lost them the game. Like the collective, I almost wonder if Kalen at some point was going to be like, "Hey, what are we thinking up there? Like, what's going on, guys? Like, what?" Like,
yeah,
that was even not an unlike DeBoer offense, honestly.
Oh no, and so that's what I wanted to say, because I'm really glad you mentioned that, because that was where I wanted to take it a step further when you said, yeah, that Mike just kind of looked a little frustrated on the sidelines. I don't blame him, first of all. Not at all. But I just wanted to make sure that was touched on, because we haven't seen that under Kalen DeBoer, right? They scored 15 points, and none of them came from the offense scoring touchdowns, like special teams and a defensive touchdown. That is unheard of. That's what this is. And that's just weird. That's frustrating, where we haven't seen that before. And then I don't blame him for just kind of, getting to him a little bit, but in the same vein, it's adjust. That's what I said it earlier in the show. That's what you're getting paid all this money to do, to adjust. And it kind of, in my opinion, it felt overconfident in a certain way. And I know that's something we've touched on the show before, where it's, yeah, we're going to stick to our guns and we're going to make you adjust to us. And it's something Grubb has said earlier in the season. And there has to be a certain point of just bending, of just, okay, this isn't working. Like at halftime, it was something you said to me, where it's, okay, this isn't working. What are they going to do to adjust? How are they going to change this up? Nothing happened. Nothing changed. And like it's not like with the personnel that you had in that game. Why are you calling so many 5 wide sets? Why are you sending Dylan Johnson out of the backfield? I understand how you use motion. I get it. But that's not the discussion at this point in time. It's Michael Penix. If you're going to keep calling these routes, have somebody else in there to help protect him.
Right. Or have play designs to get the ball out quicker. Like if you're going to put Dylan Johnson out in motion, a ball better be out in 2 seconds to Dylan. Like, okay, then I could see it, right? Then and if those don't work, fine. But at least you're adjusting and you're trying and you're showing, hey, you know what? We got to go to a quick passing game because they're bringing so much pressure. I mean, it's what we talk about opposing offenses doing with Washington's defensive line, where it's like, hey, how come UW doesn't have any sacks? Well, they're getting pressure. They're just getting the ball out quick. It's like, right. Well, when you're calling 3 and 4 second routes down the field, it's kind of hard to get the ball out at 2 when Polk or Rome aren't beyond the 20-yard line. And it's like, if you really want Penix to start throwing out 50-50 balls to win a game, I mean, I understand he can do that, but there's plenty more in Ryan Grubb's arsenal than what he showed last night. And for whatever reason, he didn't go to it. He had a 357. He had the entire wall full of his gun collection, and he was firing with a water pistol. It was insane. It was like, you have all of this ability. It wasn't like John Donovan came back and was like, hey, you know what? We're going back to the base, rookie Madden mode offense, where it's like, we don't really have more than 7 play calls. It's like, no. Arizona State ran the same play 10 times last night and was effective 9 out of 10 times. Like, my word. Like, so you can use the same plays over and over. It was the fact that they didn't even try to experiment a little bit. And when they did experiment with that fly sweep to Jalen Polk on 3rd and 10, that was the experiment you don't want to see.
Right. I know our last segment of Lars's final thought is a little bit unstructured, where I just kind of just like hand it off to you, which is something we didn't see a lot last night. Sorry, I had to get one more of those in there. But today I have a question for you because I wanted to give an answer and then let you get the final thought in there with this question. Are you concerned about the offense moving forward? I know it's a weird question to ask, but I'm not. And let me tell you why. Is they're going to get Jalen McMillan and German Bernard back. Maybe it's this week against Stanford. Maybe it's next week against USC. But I'm not, because they found a way to win so far. And I think that the positive to take away from this Arizona State game on the offensive side of the ball is now Ryan Grubb has, to this point at least, shown that he's been unwilling to adapt. So maybe we're going to see that this week where it's okay. This is what Stanford's going to try to do to just attack the offensive line, right? Just send these overload blitzes. Oh, they're shorthanded at wide receiver. All right. We're just going to overload him and make him get the ball out quickly. We saw that he has the capability to do that at the very end of the game. So what's stopping you from just doing that earlier? Find ways to do that because the personnel is there. Everything is there to make it work. And so I'm not concerned, but I would definitely say that if this goes on again, I might kind of start to lean in that direction.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I think it's more humbling than anything else. This is a game that should certainly humble Ryan Grubb. And again, I'm not saying he's not a humble guy, right? I mean, like, he's confident, right? I mean, Kalen's humble, right? Everybody knows Kalen's humble. But, like, it's not that Ryan Grubb isn't humble, but it's almost like, hey, like, I think Ryan needed this game, this type of game. Like, hey, you're a great play caller. You're a great offensive mind, but you don't have all the answers all the time. And so when you don't, how do you handle that? And can you, I mean, the fact that they pulled out a win with no offense, I mean, it's like, okay, hey, look, the defense is going to say, hey, you know what? We're not going to lose the season tonight, so we're going to get the win, but y'all got to be humble. Like, stay humble. Like, sit down, be humble. Like, that sort of thing.
Thanks, Kendrick.
Exactly. So, like, because like, to your point, they have the talent, they have the weapons. It was like, it would be different if we're like, okay, Rome's out for the season, or Dylan's out for the season, or God forbid Penix gets hurt, like a legitimate must miss a couple of games sort of thing. That would be the only time I would actually be concerned about the offense, because otherwise you have the horses. It's just a matter of getting the horses and the bookie along the same page.
I couldn't agree with you more there. Lars, as always, thank you for being here with us. And thank you to all the everydayers for tuning in. Again, we apologize for this coming to you on Monday, but 7:30 games, the 7:30 kickoffs are really, really hard on us. So we really appreciate you bearing with us as we just kind of give you one last look with our insanely tired eyes. But if you're not an everydayer yet, we'd love for you to become one. There are a lot of really easy ways to do that. Wherever you're listening to this podcast right now, whether that's YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music, we are there. We are everywhere. Please feel free to subscribe. Make sure you like the podcast, leave us a 5-star review. Just check us out wherever we're on Twitter. Follow us on there. Leave us a question, and we will try to get back to as many of you as we possibly can. Again, thank you so much for listening, and we will talk to you on Tuesday.